double check. Oh, look at that. 420 on the dot. Make sure we are live. One second, guys. It says I'm live, but it's not showing me that I'm live. All right. So we are live indeed. All right. So I was just listening to a Spaces on X.
Right? I mean, and you're just mentioning that the technology has to change, right? So it's not perfect, right?
Yeah.
He literally said, "We're in development. We're in development." Bitcoin does not need the development, right? Layer 2, maybe, for sure.
Is this Bitcoin? There's no second best, and they're talking. A bunch of Bitcoin maxis are speaking to some of the Kaspa crowd, and there's a bunch of different things being brought up, and it just kind of made me run some numbers out of curiosity today. So some of the things that were brought up as issues, Kaspa's supply being too large, and even though the halving rate is going to push through those coins in about a decade's time, and the only incentive will be off Kaspa fees. Well, correct, because the whole goal of Kaspa being it's going to be used as a currency as Bitcoin was supposed to be. So when you look at the total number of Kaspa in supply, total supply, versus the number of Satoshis out there, assuming there is 17 million coins in supply, and that's taking into account all lost, locked, and not locked, but locked in the Satoshi wallet, etc. So I broke it down using Grok, and I think it's pretty interesting stuff. So let's take a peek at this here. We're gonna let it replay itself and kind of look at what you think. So let's close the space here. So how many Satoshis are in 17 million Bitcoin? That's the number we're going to go off of how many we have in the total circulating supply when everything is mined. And you're going to get a very large number. It is, I believe, 17 followed by 14 zeros, if I am correct. I'm not sure what that number ends up being, because it gives it to me in a number form as the answer. I don't know. I hate this new... I need to think on it, I suppose. Let's just see if I can quick copy paste this. I don't know why the hell I did that. Alright. So, alright. So there are this many Satoshis in the total supply once all Bitcoin are mined. This is much larger than the Kaspa supply. What is the Kaspa supply? It's about 29 billion. So 28.7 billion, okay, when everything is mined. So taking that into account, there are far less Kaspa out there than there are Satoshis. So I was kind of trying to figure out, all right, so as somebody who believes in Kaspa and somebody who believes in Bitcoin, say that Kaspa was to become kind of what Bitcoin was meant to be and fulfills that prophecy of being able to survive off of mining just fees and to keep the network secure based off of no mining fees due to the way that the schedule is put out, and after about 10 years there's going to be no point in mining outside of fees from actual network activity. So assume this happens. This is an assumption that this happens, that it fulfills its kind of destiny, if you will, right? So, how many Kaspa is equal to a Bitcoin, if you will, or how much, do you have today? So let's use I broke some numbers down randomly earlier. Let's just use, well, first, okay, let's divide this number here divided by the total Kaspa supply once everything is mined, 28.7 billion. And there's your answer here. 59,233. Okay, so basically for every one Kaspa coin, there is 59,233 Satoshis out there. Okay, so I have to remember how I did this math now, because now this is getting down to how I got to this. So say you're holding 15,000 Kaspa, right? Okay, so I think this is how I did it. So take 15,000 Kaspa and you're going to multiply it by this 59,233 number, because one Kaspa is equivalent to 59,233 Satoshis when all is broken down if the market caps were equal. Okay, if the market caps were equal, one Satoshi and 59, one Kas at 59,000 Satoshis would be worth the same based on the two total supplies. Okay, multiplied by 59,233. So 15,000 Kaspa is the equivalent of 888,495,000 Satoshis. If Kaspa got to a 1-to-1 with Bitcoin on a market cap level, right? Which, again, I've looked this up, would put Kaspa at approximately $88. It's 1,000x to get from where we are to Bitcoin's price now. Obviously, Bitcoin will continue moving up, and this is going to continue to be a bar to be chased. But just based off of today's math, okay? Based off of today's math, you are looking at, so now, how many, for those of you who are unaware, how many Satoshis are in a Bitcoin? Okay, there's 100 million, right? So now we're going to take 888,495,000 divided by the amount of Satoshis in a Bitcoin. So if you own 15,000 Kaspa today, it is like owning 8.88 Bitcoin. Okay, assuming you get to that final ratio of 1-to-1. If it gets to only 1/10 of the market cap, let's say we eventually, Bitcoin hits its high and Kaspa hits its high, and it kind of starts to stable out in 10 years or so, and we're able to acquire 1/10 of the market cap of Bitcoin, okay? And we're able to keep that pretty staggered, as Bitcoin goes up, Kaspa goes up, and it keeps about a 10-to-1 ratio, right? So 15,000 Kaspa would be like owning 0.88 Bitcoin in that case. So the number of Kaspa I would recommend holding in the instance that we were to get to 1/10 and be able to hold 1/10 of the market cap of Bitcoin, you would want to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 17,000 Kaspa, which would be equivalent to 1 Bitcoin. And we all know what 1 Bitcoin looks like today. And if you hold a Bitcoin, you know the kind of club you're in, right? So brings me to my next point. I found probably the coolest retirement calculator I've yet to find. So let's dig into this, right? We are going to include the taxes. You can exclude or include depending on if you are in a country that has taxes in Bitcoin or not. We are in the United States right now, so we are going to say yes. Tax rate could be anywhere from 10 to 20% depending on what you are cashing out. We are going to cash out, we'll use annual expenses of $99,000 for tax purposes of keeping it under 100,000. That would put us in a 15% tax bracket opposed to a 20% tax bracket, okay? And we're going to first use the Michael Saylor numbers, okay? Of over the next 2 decades, he expects 30%. And after that, he expects a trailing 20%, okay? I think this is incredibly too high. So we'll use the next decade will be 20 and then it'll fall off after that, all right? So annual inflation, we're going to leave at 10%. I think that's a fair number to use. That's the built-in number it comes with. We could because I think these numbers are a little boosted, we can even boost the inflation. Let's make it 12%, okay? So, all right, we're just going to use my age. So I'm 38. We're going to use a retirement year. Let's say I want to retire realistically by the time I'm 60. No later than 60. So that's 22 years from now. That'd be 2047. And I expect to live till I'm about 80, 85 maybe. So let's just say 23 years expected spending. That would mean after 2047, I would not touch my Bitcoin until 2047. And at that point, I would start spending for 23 years, which would be the remainder of my life. Okay. So if we based on Saylor's numbers, the next 2 decades, you know what, let's do it like this. The next 2 decades being, let's say 2020, so that all the rest of the 2020s, which is 5 years, and all of 2030s. So at 2040, we'll cut this down to 20%, and then he said 20% for a running number. I don't think it's going to remain at 20%, so let's just drop it to 10 then here. Because I think this is already high, being 30, 30, 30 on average. And of course, this is an average over 5 years. We can have years of drawdown. Of course, we're going to have years of drawdown on CAGR, but it should average 30, okay? So again, we're going into this $99,000 per year we're going to be spending, okay? With a 12% inflation rate, retirement year of 2047, and then spending for 23 years after, using Michael Saylor's suggested numbers, essentially for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, for the next 25 years, we're going to go off of his math. You would need 0.1267 Bitcoin, and that includes the taxes being paid. And it gives you the breakdown. This is the Why Bitcoin Show, WHY, whybitcoinshow.com, and then you just click the Bitcoin retirement calculator at the top. This is an awesome tool. So say you are somebody who is younger and you're 20 right now. You want to retire by the time you're 50. So 30 years from now, 2055. That'll make you 50. It'll give you a good 35 years to live after. That same $100,000, what would you need? 0.1781. I think that's a doable number for somebody who is, 20 years old right now. to be able to acquire that much Bitcoin. Yeah, you're going to have to push and you're going to have to be a decent earner. Unfortunately, I didn't have that luxury. And like I have said, and I will continue to say because it is a lesson, I stacked incredibly heavy in earlier days and sold in 2017 at the top and was never able to acquire the same amount of Bitcoin that I had and will probably never be able to again, the way things look. So not even close. So let's take these numbers down now. Let's go back to my scenario, retiring, and we said 38. I want to retire by the time I'm 60. That's 22 years. That is 2047. And then we'll be living approximately, that would be 60, approximately another 20 years. Let's drop these down. Say 25% from 25 to 2030. Let's say 20% from 2030 to 2035. Say 23% from 2035 to 2040. 20% 2040 to 2045. 15%. 10%, 10%, 8%, 6%, 5%, 4%. Perfect. So, given a little more realistic and, in my opinion, a little bit more fair of a number than what Saylor is giving, I do think he is very bullish, obviously. I would be too if I was in his situation, but in this situation, 0.3 is what you need. So anywhere from, and again, this is spending $100,000 a year. If you can live off, it's hard to say because we don't know what the economy is going to look like in 20 years from now. But based on a 12% annual expense or annual inflation expense, you're looking at this. So 0.1 to 0.3 Bitcoin is kind of where you want to be. Off the math of general people in the world and how much Bitcoin out there, the numbers I've gotten to that you want to be at, 0.21 to 0.26. Those are kind of the key numbers to stack to if I was giving somebody some kind of number that if they were like, hey, what is a good amount of Bitcoin to have if I want to make it and Bitcoin works and Bitcoin hits the numbers that it was expected to hit. Well, in that case, if everything happened like it was supposed to, I think 0.21 to 0.26 Bitcoin would get you there. You'd be able to live pretty happily with that amount. So just wanted to go over all that real quick. The Kaspa to Bitcoin thing, Bitcoin to retire, the site, and that's about it. Market's kind of ass today, a little bit toppy. I do think we're going to go higher on this pump. Just a little bit of consolidation right now from Bitcoin. All coins are feeling the pain as the Bitcoin dominance is starting to come back up a little bit. Not much, but there is some motion. So did come from 64.2 all the way back up to 64.9, back down to 64.7 here. So I'm expecting kind of, well, it looks like right now what it's trying to do is kind of paint some little inverse head and shoulders doo-wop and back on up. Will cause a little more pain, maybe back into my zone of interest here, and then we kind of consolidate and shit the bed, something like that. So we will see. Keep an eye on that, guys. The market looks strong, though. Stay where you're at. I would not be dumping any coins for any reason at this point. Nothing but accumulation for me or sitting still. So, that being said, stay bullish, boys. If you missed the episode, feel free to rewind it. I think this is actually a really good one if you're a Kaspa holder or if you're just interested in the overall amount of Bitcoin you're going to need with a solid Bitcoin calculator, like a really solid Bitcoin calculator for once. Again, whyBitcoinshow.com, WHY, not the letter Y. and you can fit all this to your personal needs. And again, if you are curious on the Kaspa to Bitcoin situation, zoom back and take a look after this is over. Please drop a like, subscribe, hit the bell. There will be more. Until the next one, guys, stay bullish and peace.